Welcome back. Today, we turn to Ukraine's ongoing counteroffensive, which has taken another dramatic step forward. The story carries the headline, Ukraine's winning Blitz continues Russia's war artery severed. To understand this moment, let's break it down. Ukraine has been employing a Blitz strategy, swift, targeted strikes designed to disorient Russian forces and cut through their defenses. Unlike traditional warfare that grinds slowly, Blitz operations focus on speed, surprise, and precision. Ukraine has mastered this by striking not only the front lines, but the very backbone of Russia's military operations. That backbone is the supply line, what we often call the war's artery. Just as a human body cannot function when a main artery is cut, an army cannot fight when its flow of fuel, ammunition, and reinforcements is disrupted. By targeting bridges, railways, and depots, Ukraine has effectively slowed Russia's war machine. Tanks without fuel, soldiers without supplies, and artillery without shells quickly become ineffective. The impact on the battlefield is already visible. Russian units are increasingly strained, morale is weakening, and commanders face the impossible task of fighting a war while their logistics crumble. Meanwhile, Ukraine gains momentum, both militarily and psychologically, by demonstrating that Russia's advantages are not untouchable. Looking ahead, the future implications are significant. Cutting off these arteries does not end the war overnight, but it shifts the balance. It forces Russia to stretch its resources, while showing the world that Ukraine's strategy is not just about defense, it is about dismantling the foundations of Russia's campaign. For the international community, this moment highlights the critical role of logistics in modern warfare, and why support in intelligence, precision weapons, and infrastructure targeting can reshape an entire conflict. In short, Ukraine's winning Blitz is not simply a headline, it is a real-time lesson in how wars are won not just with firepower, but with strategy, speed, and the ability to strike at the lifelines of the enemy. Thank you for following this analysis. Ukraine's Blitz strategy represents one of the most fascinating military evolutions of the 21st century. Unlike traditional operations where armies slowly build up strength, dig into defensive positions and engage in drawn-out battles, Ukraine has leaned heavily into speed and surprise. The essence of a Blitz, which comes from the German term Blitzkrieg meaning lightning war, is to move so quickly and strike so precisely that the enemy cannot properly respond before serious damage is done. For Ukraine, this approach has been more than a choice, it has been a necessity. Facing a much larger and better equipped adversary in Russia, Ukraine could not rely on sheer numbers or sustained firepower. Instead, its commanders turned to a doctrine that maximizes mobility, intelligence, and timing. At the heart of this strategy is the ability to identify weak points in Russian defenses and exploit them with rapid force. Ukraine has learned to avoid head-on confrontations that would drain its resources. Instead, it uses drones, precision artillery, and special operations to disrupt Russian command centers, ammunition depots, and communication networks. This causes confusion within enemy ranks, making their response slower and less coordinated. Once these weaknesses are exposed, Ukrainian units move swiftly, taking ground before Russian reinforcements can stabilize the situation. This approach has forced Russia into a reactive stance, where instead of dictating the flow of battle, its forces are constantly scrambling to adjust. Technology plays a crucial role in enabling such a strategy. Ukraine has heavily incorporated satellite intelligence, surveillance drones, and modern Western weapons into its planning. These tools allow commanders to see the battlefield in near real time and strike targets that matter most. The use of high-mobility artillery rocket systems HIMARS, for example, has been instrumental in hitting Russian supply depots far behind the front lines. The effect is not just physical destruction, but also psychological pressure. Russian troops are left uncertain about when or where the next strike might come, undermining their confidence and eroding their morale. Another critical aspect of Ukraine's Blitz is flexibility. Traditional militaries often rely on rigid structures and detailed long-term plans. Ukraine, however, has adopted a more adaptive model where smaller units operate with autonomy, making quick decisions based on local conditions. This decentralization empowers field commanders and allows Ukraine to exploit opportunities faster than an army that requires lengthy approval chains. In a fast-moving conflict, this speed of decision-making can mean the difference between success and failure. Finally, the human element should not be overlooked. Ukrainian soldiers are fighting for their homes, families, and national survival. That motivation fuels endurance and courage, which are essential in fast, high-risk operations. Blitz warfare demands constant movement, resilience under uncertainty, and the will to seize opportunities at the moment they appear. Ukraine's fighters, supported by civilian networks and local populations, embody this spirit. Their determination ensures that the Blitz is not just a military tactic, but also a reflection of national willpower. Russia's war artery, the lifeline that sustains its vast military presence in Ukraine, has now become one of the most vulnerable aspects of its campaign. In any major conflict, supply lines function much like arteries in the human body, delivering the essential resources that keep the system alive. Fuel for tanks and trucks, ammunition for artillery, food and medical supplies for soldiers, and reinforcements to replace losses. Without this steady flow, an army cannot sustain operations. Ukraine's recent actions have directly targeted these arteries, deliberately severing the channels through which Russia maintains its war effort. The strategy is clear. Instead of confronting the enemy only on the battlefield, Ukraine strikes at the logistical backbone that enables the battlefield to exist in the first place. One of the most significant elements of Russia's supply network is its reliance on railways. The Russian military doctrine has historically depended on rail transport because it allows heavy equipment, fuel, and ammunition to be moved over long distances efficiently. Ukraine, understanding this reliance, has concentrated on bridges, rail hubs, and junction points. A single destroyed bridge over a river or a damaged track in a critical sector can delay or reroute entire supply chains. This not only slows down the delivery of supplies but also forces Russia to expose convoys to longer and more vulnerable routes where Ukrainian drones and artillery can ambush them. Fuel depots and ammunition warehouses represent another critical artery. When these are hit, the consequences ripple far beyond the immediate explosion. Without consistent access to fuel, tanks and armored vehicles become immobile steel boxes. Artillery units, which Russia has heavily relied upon, lose their ability to fire when shells are in short supply. Ukraine's use of long-range precision systems has allowed it to hit these depots far behind the front lines, creating shortages that Russian commanders cannot easily replace. The result is a battlefield where Russian units may appear intact on paper, but are severely weakened in practice because their lifeline has been cut. The disruption of communication lines also plays a role in severing these arteries. Modern warfare depends on the ability to coordinate movements and resupply operations across large areas. By targeting command posts, communication relays, and even electronic systems, Ukraine hampers Russia's ability to manage its own logistics. An army that cannot coordinate is effectively blind, and its supply chains become even more chaotic under pressure. This confusion magnifies the effects of physical damage, making the severing of supply lines not just a logistical crisis, but also a command and control failure. The broader significance of these actions lies in their cumulative effect. A single strike might not cripple an army, but a series of sustained disruptions erodes Russia's operational capacity over time. Troops at the front lines face shortages, morale declines as soldiers go hungry or lack ammunition, and commanders struggle to keep units functional. Ukraine's focus on these arteries demonstrates a sophisticated understanding of modern warfare. It is not the number of soldiers or tanks that decides victory alone, but the ability to keep them supplied, fueled, and coordinated. By severing Russia's war artery, Ukraine has struck at the very heart of its opponent's campaign. The impact on the battlefield from Ukraine's ability to weaken Russian supply lines is both immediate and far-reaching. Wars are rarely won by single battles. Instead, they are shaped by a series of cascading effects where one disruption multiplies into several others. When supply chains break down, the consequences ripple through every layer of the military machine. Frontline units that rely on a steady flow of ammunition suddenly face shortages, forcing soldiers to ration their firepower or abandon positions. Tanks and armored vehicles, which are only as effective as the fuel that keeps them moving, become stationary targets once fuel depots run dry. Even basic necessities like food and medical supplies are affected, leaving soldiers undernourished and morale dangerously low. On the battlefield, this translates into slower responses, weaker defenses, and a growing sense of vulnerability among Russian forces. One of the clearest impacts has been seen in Russia's artillery capability. For much of the war, Russian forces relied on overwhelming artillery fire to grind down Ukrainian positions. However, artillery is highly dependent on constant resupply because shells are consumed in massive quantities. When depots and transport routes are destroyed, the rate of fire inevitably decreases. Ukrainian troops who once endured hours of unrelenting bombardment now report noticeably lighter shelling in certain sectors, a direct consequence of Ukraine's strikes on the supply system. This reduction not only saves lives but also provides breathing space for Ukrainian units to regroup and counterattack. Mobility on the battlefield is another key factor. Modern warfare depends on the ability to maneuver, whether it is advancing to seize ground or retreating to avoid encirclement. Without fuel, Russian armored columns lose this flexibility. Tanks become stranded, trucks loaded with supplies are abandoned, and reinforcements cannot reach critical points in time. In such conditions, Ukrainian forces can exploit static positions with greater ease, turning Russian strengths into liabilities. Even when supplies eventually arrive, the delays can mean the difference between holding a defensive line and losing it altogether. Morale is perhaps the most underestimated but most powerful consequence of these disruptions. Soldiers who feel cut off from reliable supply lines begin to doubt their commanders, their mission, and even their chances of survival. Reports from the field indicate that Russian troops in some areas have been forced to scavenge or rely on irregular deliveries, deepening the sense of neglect and frustration. In contrast, Ukrainian units gain confidence when they see the effectiveness of their strikes. Each successful hit on a Russian depot or convoy reinforces the belief that victory is not only possible but increasingly likely. This psychological contrast, Russian uncertainty versus Ukrainian momentum, shapes the battlefield as much as physical firepower. The cumulative impact is a weakening of Russia's overall operational tempo. An army that once sought to dictate the pace of battle now finds itself reacting to Ukraine's initiatives. Instead of pressing forward with coordinated offensives, Russian units are forced to pause, regroup, or retreat due to shortages. This shift in momentum allows Ukraine to seize the initiative and control the rhythm of the conflict. What begins as a logistical disruption becomes a battlefield transformation, tilting the balance of power in Ukraine's favor. The future implications of Ukraine severing Russia's main war arteries are profound, not just for the current conflict, but also for the broader lessons of modern warfare. Every successful disruption of supply lines demonstrates that wars are not merely contests of manpower and weaponry, but contests of endurance, adaptability, and strategy. For Russia, the challenge moving forward is how to sustain a military campaign when its logistical backbone is under constant attack. No matter how large an army may appear on paper, if its fuel convoys are destroyed, its ammunition depots are obliterated, and its communication hubs are disrupted, its ability to wage war steadily erodes. This recognition marks a turning point where brute force no longer guarantees dominance. On the Ukrainian side, these victories provide more than tactical gains. They create strategic opportunities. Severing arteries means forcing Russia to either divert resources toward protecting supply chains or risk watching its frontline units collapse. Both scenarios stretch Russia thinner and reduce its capacity to launch new offensives. If Ukraine continues to build momentum in this area, It could reshape the war from a struggle of defense into one of attrition that Russia cannot sustain indefinitely. Over time, the accumulation of logistical losses can cripple even a large power's ability to project strength, and this may accelerate the possibility of negotiations under conditions more favorable to Ukraine. The implications also extend to international observers and military planners worldwide. Nations studying this conflict are witnessing in real time the importance of logistics as the true foundation of warfare. The lesson is clear: high-tech weapons and massive troop deployments mean little if supply chains are vulnerable. Future conflicts will likely place even greater emphasis on securing logistical networks, building resilience into transport routes, and developing technology capable of both defending and disrupting supply arteries. Ukraine's success underscores the effectiveness of precision strikes, intelligence sharing, and decentralized command structures, concepts that will shape military doctrines far beyond Eastern Europe. For the global community, these developments also influence the political dimension of the war. Each successful Ukrainian strike not only weakens Russia's battlefield capacity, but also strengthens Ukraine's case for continued international support. Allies in the West see tangible proof that their aid is making a difference, encouraging further assistance in the form of weapons, training, and financial backing. Conversely, Russia's image as a formidable military power has suffered. A nation that once projected the image of invincibility is now struggling to protect its own lifelines, exposing vulnerabilities that were previously concealed. This shift alters how global powers calculate their relationships with Moscow, as Russia appears less reliable as a partner and more constrained as an aggressor. Ultimately, the severing of Russia's war arteries suggests a long-term trajectory in which Ukraine, despite its smaller size and resources, continues to leverage strategy over brute strength. If these trends persist, the war may evolve less around territorial gains and more around the sustainability of each side's logistical systems. And in such a contest, Ukraine has shown that determination, creativity, and international support can tilt the balance even against a seemingly superior adversary.